Okay, welcome to our special meeting of the Albany Unified School District Board of Education, Tuesday, May 23rd, 2017. May we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Chutane.
Present.
Board Member Clark.
Here.
Vice President Stapleton Gray.
Here.
President Black.
Here.
Board Member.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Good. Then we're going to move off the podium and down to the tables to have our discussion on the SIPSs for middle school and Marin School.
They're healthy.
We're supposed to pass the word that there are sandwiches, please. Jackie would like you to know that there are sandwiches in the staff room.
Yes.
If anybody's hungry. I just got.
Hey, good evening, trustees. Annually, we bring our single plan for student achievement to the Board of Education. In previous years before I came here, the schools used to present to the board, and having a work study session on our SIPSs makes it much more of a conversation that our schools and our school board can have on the single plans, and allows for some hopefully really rich dialogue. I'm going to turn this over to Peter Parenti, who's going to take us through the evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Education, trustees, principals, Deborah Brill and Alexia Ritchie, and Superintendent Williams. I'm Peter Parenti, the Assistant Superintendent, and I present to you tonight a conversation, an opportunity to hear our principals as they describe their work at their schools, how it's represented in the single plans for student achievement. We have an hour, so we're going to look at an hour broken up into 3 sections. We're going to talk first about this year's accomplishments. In 20 minutes, we're going to allow an opportunity for each of the principals to describe the accomplishments that their schools achieved this year. The next 20 minutes would be a conversation about the evidence that demonstrates this success, this student achievement results and other areas that show us that we were successful. And then an opportunity to talk about plans for next year will be the third segment. What works really well is when we stay, let's say, at around the 10,000 foot level. So we're really listening for big ideas and how school boards can support school sites. Sometimes what doesn't work well is when we get really detailed in critiquing a particular line on a page, or getting too focused on a particular data point that goes on and on too long. So I'm there to clarify details, and there may be issues of editing that need to happen, and I can take care of those afterwards. But I encourage you guys to stay at the 10,000 foot level and appreciate our principals' leadership. So I'd ask if Deborah or Alexia want to start first. You could describe your accomplishments, and we'll go from there at 5:05.
I'll break it down into the 3 areas that are covered in the site plan each year. That would be English language arts, your math, and your school culture. So the accomplishments this year for all elementaries, but Marin I'll speak for, would be the implementation of our new writing curriculum. It's called Units of Study. And what we've been able to do is implement this district adopted curriculum at all levels, kindergarten through 5th grade, with the support of teachers on special assignment, with the support of professional development that's been well thought out this year, We will be able to see some of those results on next year's SBAC because there was a full year implementation for this new curriculum. We're very excited about it. It offers a lot of opportunities for students to explore genres of writing which may not have been covered before in previous curriculum. Previous curriculum was quite scripted, and units of study is exciting in that there's many open-ended activities for students to explore their writing skills. We're very excited about seeing what's going to happen next year. When we look at the reading adoption program, and which one are we going to use, could be in alignment with the current writing curriculum. Maybe it won't be. We'll see what happens with that next year. The second area is math. We are very proud of the SBAC results that we were able to demonstrate. A majority of students, in fact, you can take a look at some of the data points, but we have across the board in 3rd, 4th, and 5th, high achievement rates in mathematics for all areas at Marin. We do recognize that there are certain students who continue to struggle with math interventions. We've been very focused this year on what to do with math intervention. We are excited to continue a dual approach, which includes an online element, Dreambox, and a personnel model which fit our value system at Marin in terms of having that qualified person in front of the student who is able to identify instantly and form some adjustments to their intervention. Math Camp, I think you read through our report. We have had a lot of really positive feedback about that, and I think if I have some time later on, we'll get more in depth. And then the last area is school culture. We've been looking at a number of topics, ranging from those that are academically linked. Social justice math was an exciting opportunity for us. I don't think I mentioned that in our site plan, but it kind of goes along with school culture, especially given the current climate. The other piece would be the extension of our conflict manager program. We've developed a community coaching program. It is going to extend into next year. 5th grade is the target group. 5th and 4th always had some issues having that peer-to-peer relationship when it comes to conflict managing. If you shift your mental model, you have an opportunity for these students to be a little more assertive in the community, to emphasize the positive, to bring students together who are having challenges making connections on the playground, to be that model of allyship when it comes to bullying, when it comes to student engagement. So we're excited to focus our site plan on our community coaching program. That's a brief summary. Should I give it to Deborah for the next piece?
Okay, thank you. So, our plan's broken up into academics, school climate, and professional development. But in terms of looking at how the year went, I think I'll start with talking about the academics piece. We had our 2nd year of implementation for college preparatory mathematics, and the difference was just wonderful to see that teachers have really settled into understanding how the curriculum needs to be taught in the most successful way. We've done a lot of cross within the department observations of one another and cross grade level observations to kind of learn and borrow what's working. A lot of opportunities for cross grade level articulation. One example of this is one of the grade levels was finding a lot of success in the way they were teaching group roles. Since they're sitting and working together during college preparatory math, of having really specifically designated roles that people have at the groups, and teaching that in a way that was really successful. And we had several teachers who went into that teacher's classroom and then brought those teaching practices back. So there's been a lot of growth within college preparatory math. Next generation science standards, we've been on a 3-year implementation plan. There was planning done before that, but the implementation is 3 years, with the idea being that we are moving to this integrated model of next generation science standards, where there's multiple areas of science in every grade level. But we wanted to do it in a way where every student wherever they were in the implementation process wouldn't miss anything. And so next year will be the first year that it's going to be taught as it will be moving forward, where each grade level has their full curriculum. So it's been a lot of shifting, but one of the great benefits of it has been that 7th and 8th grade science had always collaborated a lot, I think partially because of just location proximity, and 6th grade, having been teaching more subjects than one, was always a little bit isolated from that process. But having teacher on special assignment for science who was a 7th grade teacher supporting 6th grade 20% has been hugely positive. 6th grade teachers all asked if she would do it again next year. They really are appreciating that support. And it's really allowed for a lot of articulation to happen across grade levels. And the other piece that's happened is certain units have shifted. Like, for example, microscopes used to be a 6th grade standard, and that's now, 7th grade standard, and that's now moved to 6th grade. And so just that articulation in 7th grade has some pieces that were 6th grade, so 6th grade teachers are teaching the 7th grade teachers what they've found to be successful. So that's been really great to see, and there's a lot more hands-on activities and, kind of approaching through the engineering inquiry models. A lot of really interesting things happening in our science classrooms. And then the other sort of broader piece that I'll say is we have been really working towards this model of essential standards, common formative assessments, and intervention. And it's a huge process. And so we've completed the phase of determining essential standards for every department and every grade level this year, and have been working towards developing the common formative assessments in different departments or different places with that. But we'll be ready for next year to implement at least a couple per quarter in every department, and start to develop models around how we can address systematically school-wide intervention. And just the basic philosophical piece there, I'll say, is just that if we sort of pin down what are the standards that are absolutely essential for kids to know, either because other subjects need that information, like graphing, for example, is something that you might learn in math, but you need it to read in history, right? Or you need a particular concept in order to move on to the next level. If we're saying that these pieces are essential, then it's our responsibility to make sure that every single kid masters every single one of them. And so that's kind of our next step of figuring out, beyond just the classroom reteaching model, how do we school-wide catch these kids who are missing particular standards in a timely way. And then differentiation was our big PD focus this year. We had someone who came in the beginning of the year, did a few-hour introductory piece, and then has been coming back once a month. We have our last one tomorrow, and we're doing like a colloquium where she's bringing snacks, and where people are bringing pieces that they've developed and kind of sharing out more gallery style. But it's been I think a really nice model of having professional development that continues throughout the year as a thread, and really gives teachers a chance to work with that material and have time to develop in that area. And then I'll just end by saying, just in terms of school climate, we're always looking for what pieces are missing and how to add and complement. For example, in advisory, we added pieces around privilege and identity this year that weren't in there in the past, because it was surfacing as a need. And the other piece of that is school-wide academic behaviors, and comes from the idea that some kids come in and really just automatically kind of pick up these pieces. Oh, I write in my planner, and this is how, this is what being on time looks like, this is what being prepared looks like, this is how I get help when I'm absent. And other kids who don't come in with those pieces, and we just assume they'll just pick it up, but they don't necessarily. And so we've started a process this year where we've identified what academic behaviors kids need in order to be successful. And each department took on teaching one of those. So we have common lessons that go across that every student will get. So, for example, in one subject matter, they might be learning how to prepare for a test, and they'll learn 2 different techniques for studying for a test. Another department took on, what do you do when you're absent? How do you find out what work you missed? How do you go about getting those pieces filled in? So another department took on teaching kids how to use areas and what are healthy and productive ways to use areas in addition to the technical pieces. So that was an addition that we had this year. So I think I'll end there.
Before I ask you to start talking about questions, I just want to emphasize one piece in coming back to the math. And when I tell you this, think about the wonderful leadership we have in Alexia Ritchie and Deborah Brill. We're the only school district in the county that has closed and is approaching to completely close the achievement gap for African Americans in math. We're the only district in the county that got the green dot. That's what they say at the county. We're the only one. And it's because the leadership at the school site supports the idea that all kids get access to their grade level standards and get access to high quality math instruction. And I know that that counts a lot. So I just thought that I'd thank you in this formal place for that kind of leadership that it takes. And we'll continue to meet that goal and exceed that goal. So questions from the board about their accomplishments? Or comments or whatever you think.
Is this on? Okay. First, thank you very much. It's really encouraging to me to see the sites taking the school plans seriously and using them to guide instruction. And it's one of the small ways that I think the board has influenced the district in taking them seriously and encouraging the sites to do so. And it's a way that we can use to track how our students are doing. So I think it's very significant. I just had one question. I'm really happy with all the work that you've both described. I was just kind of curious, since especially at the middle school, there's more emphasis on essential standards and on making sure that each kid has mastered the standards. Are you considering standards-based grading?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's definitely surfaced, and I know with the high school, piloting that haiku platform that's come up. What we have started in a couple of departments, kind of on a trial basis, is monitoring essential standards. So, for example, in our 8th grade math department, every student has an online sheet. It lists all the essential standards, and it has the progression towards mastery. And so when they get tests back, it shows on a rubric aligned to which standard, and the kids mark it down so they can start to monitor their own mastery of standards. So we've done that type of a thing in pockets. In terms of shifting grades in general, we've had a lot of I shouldn't say a lot. We've had some opportunities this year for professional development and discussion around grading. We watched some educational videos and read a couple of articles and have had some pretty lively discussions about what grades mean, and have talked about, are grades a reflection of mastery of concepts? Are they a reflection of work completion? And those types of pieces, and so, which is, I think, kind of the precursor to standards-based grading, right? Of just agreeing even what our grades mean. And so we've had each department and grade level working to come to some common agreements, and we're going to be continuing the discussion. I think overall, shifting all of our grading to standards-based would be a pretty big shift. I do think moving more towards agreeing on grades being representative mostly of mastery as opposed to work habits is definitely something that is in discussion.
Something you said, Deborah, about essentially essential skills and teaching kids things that aren't under the heading of algebra or 7th grade English. Do we have any means to sort of maintain the sort of student dossier per kid and know if there are gaps and holes, and et cetera, et cetera? And I'm thinking on beyond what you said, say in the tech committee meetings discussion of digital literacy, et cetera, and a reliance necessarily on librarians and other teachers and things not in the classroom to get these kids what they need. And it would be ideally possible to say, well, who are all the kids in 7th grade who have yet to have this digital citizenship exposure? We can't really do that because it's not a part of the class they have to take yet. When I was in school, I imagined that my permanent record was this thing off somewhere very detailed, all the way down to every infraction. I know Aries looks like grades and attendance and little more. Do we have any means to know which kids are in the cohort of ones who still need this, ones who've definitely checked off these 6 boxes?
Yeah, we don't have a means of doing that at this point. And I think we're in the academic realm of essential standards. We're really working towards being able to monitor that. The 8th grade math being an example. In terms of some of these other pieces, though, I think. We've always used the California Healthy Kids Survey as our one sort of school climate of like what, how do people see and feel about school, but it's different than skills-based, right? Of like what skills do kids have? And I do think, as we kind of look as a district on what are these other pieces that we think are essential for kids to have to, know how to be successful and a good citizen in the world, I do think that how we measure those things is really important. And certainly through our advisory program and those types of things, we could be doing pre and post assessments and things like that. We haven't. But.
And Healthy Kids is an aggregate. We'd know that 20% of the kids are vaping, and we need to talk to them about that. But we would know that Joey is the problem.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, and catching those things, I'll give you just an interesting example. We were having a lot of problems with kids not sorting trash at lunch, right? So compost, recycling, trash. And so one of the things we identified is, okay, well, it seems like there's a lot of kids who actually don't know where things go. It's not just a matter that they don't feel like dealing with it. So we started this piece in science where they have a soil sorting activity. They're taught these different pieces, and they take a quiz. If they don't pass the quiz, then we are giving them follow-up lessons until they pass that quiz so that every kid knows how things get sorted. So it is an interesting thing of like, what do we actually feel like they need to know, and how do we then know if they know it, know who knows it, know who doesn't, and how do we hold them accountable, right? We need another 5 hours in the day, I think.
And talk to design build at the high school and say, develop a way that people would better know how to get stuff where it needs to go. Solve that problem.
Charlie, do you have any questions on this year's accomplishments from Marin or Albany Middle? Oh, Charlie?
Okay, now I'm not on mute. No, I don't. Thank you.
Alexia, could you give us a little more detail on the community coaching program, how that differs from conflict manager, and what the progress is?
Great, because it ties in with opportunities for site-based leadership at the student level. So we're really excited about that. Traditionally, Albany elementary schools have a conflict manager program, which allows a number of students, depending on which site you're speaking about. At Marin, we do have a model that includes all students in grades 4 and 5 being trained in conflict manager resolution techniques. And then we ask who would like to volunteer for those positions. And so we can roughly volunteer every year anywhere from 40 to 50% of a particular class. And that's exciting and it's very effective. But what was not effective were the peer-to-peer conflict resolution strategies that you were hoping to see, let's say, between 5th, 4th, and 4th. The dynamic at Marin is interesting. We have 2 different playgrounds. It allowed us to shift the conflict managers to the younger yard, kind of building that stamina for the program, building the respect for the program. So that was in place. Again, the missing component was what to do with the older students, with their peers. We looked at the middle school programs, we looked at the high school programs, we just didn't have an equivalent. So we developed what's called a community coaching pilot this year, which allowed our 5th grade students to, in essence, redefine what their roles were amongst their peers. And we went through a series of conversations with, I'll call it my steering committee. I had perhaps 6 to 10 5th grade students who were very excited about this prospect. So we got together, again, some of the core values of what a community coach needs to instill in their classmates. What is their role? Can they be more assertive versus being receptive? Conflict managers, your role is to be receptive. You wait until the problems come to you. We wanted then to change that mental model a little bit when it came to community leadership. How can you be assertive in your community? We also looked at our 2nd step curriculum, being assertive, developing empathy, developing compassion. All of those are key components to 2nd step, which is our social emotional learning curriculum in the elementary schools. So we took those foundational principles and in essence asked the 5th graders how could they develop a program that helped them model those fundamental principles of SEL, social emotional learning, at the same time providing an opportunity for site-based leadership at the student level and again, my philosophy, it's a lot easier to empower the masses to shift a culture at a school site as opposed to targeting, and I use that term loosely, the students who are creating some of the major issues at your school site. Much better to empower the masses. So my community coaches and I, with the help of Joanne Weil, who is the, you know Joanne Weil because she's with the city, we got together, and at no cost, we basically borrowed from another toolkit. Dovetail is the name of the company. And they have a number of tools. In fact, they have 10 of them that they've published. And we picked the ones that we liked, and we had actually a second grade steering committee member help us develop the honesty tool. So we came up with 5 tools that we wanted these community coaches to use in their yard. We shifted the optic of the program. The conflict managers wear a big jacket, and if you've seen it, it's a different color for each site. We, again, thought about the peer-to-peer component. We whittled it down to a pretty cool lanyard. Again, identifiable on the yard as you are an ally, you are a community coach, you are someone who has the stamina and the skill sets to be a community leader. And we piloted it this year with a number of students, and then with my steering committee, we developed a brief training protocol, and again went in and we trained every 5th grader, so about 88 5th graders have been trained not only in conflict manager resolution, but community coaching skills. And we asked, once again, for volunteers, and we had about 25 5th graders step up and volunteer. In the midst of this, we had what was happening at the high school fall into not the lap, but the privilege of my community coaches responding to that and saying, we need to do a play about this. We can do this. You know, that's our role. We've been trained, and we have that empathy already in us and that credibility with our peers. So I think I might have forwarded a copy of the video that we created, and some of you were in the audience, and I can certainly forward that. But they were the authors of what we called our Unity Assembly, and they, again, took that on with the ownership of being a school leader who had the skill sets, and again, I'll go back to the community credibility, to say something very courageous in front of every single student in our school. We had 1st grade through 5th grade involved with the Unity Assembly. So that's in essence what it is, and we're excited to develop it further and see where it goes.
So we're gonna. You have a question? Yeah.
Quick question. So you mentioned that you guys are using the Dovetail Learning, the toolbox, and you just started this year?
I'm sorry?
You just started this year?
We did.
Is that for every grade level, or I think, did you say just 5th grade or some of the conflict managers?
Well, what's interesting is that the conflict managers are working at pretty much the primary grades. So 1st through 3rd, they have this system that works for them to manage conflict. It was the peer-to-peer. So right now I'm just using it with 5th grade. Although ironically, a 2nd grader did introduce me to Dovetail. He had been a student in West County, a pretty rough neighborhood actually, and he came to my office for a reason, and he introduced me to that toolkit. And when that kid could pull out, literally, he could name all 10 tools that he could use to center himself, to repair what was going on in his community. It was an awesome thing for me to sponge off of, adapt, and we did invent our 11th tool, which is the honesty tool, to really connect with the peer-to-peer. We want to start there first. In essence, we did the same thing with conflict managers. I started in the younger grades, and as the system gets older, it just builds on itself. The credibility builds on itself. So right now, if we're just going to do it in 5th grade, if it works right, we'll be able to bring it down to all of the grades, but we'll have worked out the kinks before we actually jump into the younger grades.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you're using it. I mentioned this to Peter back in January when we were at a systems thinking training, and our school in San Leandro, we have been using it for 2 years, from kindergarten all the way through 5th, and we've seen some really good results. So I highly recommend us looking a little bit deeper if we can maybe implement it at other grade levels and across the school district. I mean, it's really helped school climate at my particular school, and I'm very happy to hear that you guys are using it. Thank you.
Agreed. It's a perfect complement, quite frankly, to Second Step. Second Step is a bit rigorous in terms of its presentation in the classroom, and that Dovetail Toolkit was an instant resource that, again, every student from first grade, at least up through fifth, could recognize. What's exciting, Jacob, is we would like to bring it to kindergarten, and I'm thinking then that I would probably start with having community coaches in kindergarten. So the idea is to peer-to-peer it out a little bit, because that's what was missing with our conflict manager program. Good.
So it's 5:30. We've got plenty of time to cover two more segments to the conversation tonight. The evidence that demonstrates success is the part of the school plan that contains student achievement data, sometimes California Healthy Kids survey data, and it does two things. It ties back to the areas that were successful, because several of the data points demonstrate that we were successful. It also sets us up to identify the goals that are coming up in the third section. So I just asked the principals if they could describe some of the data points that you included, why they matter to the school, how they guide your schools or how they guide your teachers. We all know that data serves us in different ways. So as a teacher looks at data, they're going to think about their instructional programs and the ways they teach in the classroom. As a principal looks at data, they're going to look at how they guide departments and grade level teams. As districts look at data, they're going to look at how they guide schools and divisions of the district. So just let's get back to that perspective of how does a school site use data? What data do you include in your SIPs and why?
A couple of things we do use. We'll start with a big one, of course, which is SBAC, although we'll put an asterisk on that because remember, SBAC only assesses your third through fifth graders. And so we have a pretty good idea of how the outcomes look for the students at Marin. And if you look at our SBAC scores across the board, we have some very good news to report. In fact, I think one of the highlights would be our math achievement, whereas if I'm pulling out of my head, probably less than 5% scored below standard, and everybody else was either approaching, met, or exceeded. If you look at the overall growth, we did go up by a couple of points in both English language arts and math, and so our trajectory is solid. When we are looking specifically at students, however, one of the I guess barriers is easy access to that data. And so it takes a little bit of finessing to get, for example, what my teachers are really interested in, which is how did my kids last year do? That gives them a lot of formative data ideas to project for this year. If you're just looking at how your current students are doing, that's something, but it really doesn't tell you how you did. It doesn't let you reflect on what your practices were last year and how effective you were. It's also going to be exciting to see cohorts of students and what their individual growth is. In the old data system, it was very difficult to measure growth from year to year with each student, and now it's much more accessible to see if that one particular student, who still might be, let's say, in the gap area, are they making progress? And if they are, then you can go back and identify what changes you made to their program, what happened differently with the curriculum. So being able to really pinpoint individual student growth is a benefit on the SBAC. It's important for Marin because, for example, when we're looking at students who traditionally fall within that gap, your African American and your Latino students, African American students at Marin do not number enough to get a cohort score. And so it's essential, and this is what we did this year. We actually broke that down by name, and we took a look at the students and how they did from year to year. And then we were able to not assign, but engage a conversation with the staff. What happened with that particular student and how was their story different from that student? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And so we were able to get down to the student level when it came to our African American students. I guess that's what I want to highlight right now. Everything else kind of falls into place. We have benchmarks, which are the local assessments. We have those for math, reading, and writing. We also have CELT information. Again, all of this is showing a trajectory of progress for Marin. We're very excited about that. And we do look at Healthy Kids Survey, although right now only our fifth graders take it. And so we get to see, again, some exit data from that.
So I think, one of the things I would say just in terms of the SBAC, there's, obviously our overall scores. One of the things that we struggle with is when you're looking at growth, do you compare groups of students from how the sixth graders did one year versus when they were seventh graders the next year, knowing it's a different test that they took, but the same group of students? Or are you comparing sixth grade to sixth grade, how he did as a grade level, same test, but different group of students, right? So it is a little bit complicated in terms of really knowing what to hang your hat on, so to speak. We did also engage in a process similar to what Alexia described with the help of Peter's office and then our counselors, where we broke it down for every student who did not meet standards on the SBAC. We looked at who they were what their race, ethnicity was, what their gender was, and we also looked at were they also special ed, ESL, and found that a huge number of our students who didn't do well were in multiple categories. And so it's an important piece of information just in terms of informing how we respond. If the issue is that they are ESL students, what the type of support that they need may already be in place. They may just need another year of English language learning before they can be proficient on the English part of the SBAC, or maybe there's something different that they need. And if it's special ed related, again, we can kind of look to their IEP process. So it was just helpful to kind of look at, again, who the particular students are. And we do well enough in Albany where we can really look at, okay, there's a finite number of kids who are not meeting standard. Who are those kids? What's their story? So we went through a process with that with our staff. And I think if nothing else, teachers knowing, okay, this student in my class didn't meet standards. I'm going to keep my eye on them and look for extra ways to support them. I think even just that in of itself is valuable. In terms of our local assessments, I feel like we are, as our curriculum stabilizes, we are kind of moving to a place of having more stable local assessments. That's been a real challenge the last few years. It's like every other year is, we have a new math curriculum and we're still figuring this one out. And, so I think now that's stabilizing for the first time. For example, in science, we were able to articulate grades 6, 7, and 8 on our inquiry project and really look at the rubric and what are we expecting? What does this rubric look like in 6th grade versus 7th versus 8th, where we're still building those same skills, but having expectations that are grade level appropriate. Our SRI, we now, it's our Scholastic Reading Inventory test, Lexile. Teachers really appreciate this assessment for a number of reasons. One of which is that you can give it multiple times in a year. And it gives a nice kind of breakdown of students' reading skills, and also comes then with a book list as well, which is a nice add-on of books at the reading level. So now our entire school does a spring and a fall and a spring assessment, which is on page 18 of our SIPSA, and it shows a lot of growth for students in the area of reading. Students who are in a reading intervention class and a reading support class are given the SRI more frequently to assess their growth and whether they're making progress. So that's another piece that we use. And then the other piece that I was going to highlight is just another data point, which is looking at our referrals. We have worked this year, and our assistant principal's done a really nice job of tracking referrals in a number of different ways. Referrals by ethnicity is one piece, and basically what, at this point, in terms of proportionality to our school population, our white students are over-referred and our Asian students are under-referred, and everything else is more or less in line with our school population. And then in terms of gender is where you really see a huge disparity, which is nationally true, which is our male students are 89% of our referrals. So, which brings up the topics of what's happening in the classrooms that are not working for some of our boys, and there's been a lot of different types of discussions of what are needs that are unique to them and the way a classroom structure that could be lending themselves to referrals. What about opportunities and supervision and structures during lunchtimes or PE? So we've had some interesting discussions. I think we'll put a little more focus into that in the coming year. So I will leave off there.
So on that last point on referrals, a number of us here were at the presentation last night at Ocean View discussing bullying. and the discussion of physical bullying and verbal bullying. And so I wouldn't say because we're not referring a lot of girls, there isn't, say, necessarily a lot of meanness happening. It just may not be measurable. So getting a handle on what all is actually happening is a huge thing. And I know the adult to kid ratio at the school being as low as it is hard to know what all is happening. And I just leave it at that.
Anything else? Questions or comments? No?
Charlie, did you have any questions on this section?
You know, I think I heard Deborah saying something about the referrals, and I found that interesting. Is that correct? Is that where you were?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it would be great if we could get that kind of chart that goes back 3 or 4 years as well.
I can answer that one. We are working on getting the last 4 years. I have them. I had to get some interpretation of what the numbers meant, and I actually got that information yesterday afternoon. So I should be able to provide. I'm actually trying to get staff to give me the last 10 years of data.
Right, and for the high school too, I assume.
And, you know, and in terms of referrals, one thing I would also just say is we are really breaking down what the referrals are for, and looking at different things to put in place. So, you know, one example of this that we talk about in here is that a lot of the behavior coming through the office is, student to student reactivity to something. And so, working we're looking at having some anger management groups next year, mindfulness, some different pieces of just trying to help kids to connect with, okay, I can feel myself getting angry. What am I going to do? Because not all the time, but the vast majority of the time after the facts, they're like, oh yeah, I did this. I know I shouldn't have said that. They know it, but in the moment, they might do it again tomorrow, right? And so it's that piece of how do we help them to slow down and deal with, strong feelings. So that's one of the, so I think this data is important to us just in terms of informing the types of groups we run, what types of counseling interventions we can have that can complement our disciplinary process.
Thanks. Anyone else?
So the final section, and we have plenty of time now for planning for next year. Ideas that you have that you're maintaining programs and programs that have been effective and why they're maintained, and then maybe some additions or some programs that maybe are canceled.
For Marin, we are certainly looking at professional development supports for the new reading curriculum that we are piloting probably as early as now. In the classrooms, we have kindergarten through 5th grade teachers who are piloting different reading programs. Next year, we're going to be looking at comprehension programs in particular. For the past several months, we've been looking at word work. We've been looking at vocabulary development. We've been looking at sight words. We've been looking at phonemic awareness programs. And so we're going to be partnering that with comprehension programs. It could look like our current writing program. It could look a little different. It could be a suite of curricular items that the students have access to and that our teachers are teaching. But next year, we certainly need to shift our teacher on special assignment focus, our professional development days, our Wednesdays, to supporting the staff with our new reading curriculum. Whether we pilot that for all year, I think is going to be off the table. I think we're piloting it, and then towards the end of the year, we're actually adopting something. Peter, I think that's the trajectory next year. So it would behoove us to get up and running with the reading programs. Again, we've done a little bit of that with word work. Next year would be a real focus on comprehension. For math at Marin, we're going to continue using our Dreambox programs for students who need, I would say, extension. They would need engagement. They don't necessarily use Dreambox for intervention. We are going to be looking more closely at how we can perhaps use that for intervention, and that's going to require some professional development time given to teachers just to be able to use the back room of Dreambox. How can I assign a student a particular skill? How can I assess them within Dreambox? How can I track their progress and so forth? So we're going to be moving more into what Dreambox can do for students, as well as balancing that with our personnel strategically placed intervention called Math Camp. Math Camp is an interesting concept because it does two things for us. Number one, the term camp is different from club. We think camp is fun, we think camp is short term, and we think camp is something that folks would like to go to. What we wanted to stay away from was a trajectory of math intervention tracking, which once a student gets into a track of math, sometimes it's very difficult, as you know, to get out of that. Math Camp then is our 4 to 6 week program. Right now we've done it for kindergarten through 2nd grade. We have 4 weeks for kindergarten. We have 6 weeks for 1st and 2nd graders. We don't necessarily pick the students first. We pick the standard first, and then we ask teachers who need some extra support in that standard. They come into the camp. They are taught that particular standard in a very concentrated manner, and then we are looking at how they apply that back in the general ed classroom. We're going to continue on with that model. We're excited to see if we can expand it into the upper grades, 3rd through 5th. And then we're also going to be looking at, again, increased opportunities for site leadership, students in particular, staff as well, and then the culturally respectful or cultural equity skill sets that the district at large would be looking at next year. We're excited to embrace those, both with our social emotional learning and our different programs that we have set up for students. I think that's what I want to summarize.
Thank you. So I think just in terms of looking towards next year, I think curricular-wise, I think I kind of covered that in the first section of where we're headed with those pieces. I think a couple of things I will highlight, though, is in terms of our professional development. We every year do a survey of teachers to look at what professional development was successful during the past year, which pieces they didn't find as helpful, and then looking towards the following year. The 2 highest ranked pieces that came out, one was subject department specific PD, wanting to have more professional development in their specific content area. So we were looking into a model for our October PD day next year of trying to bring in some different PD in different departments, as well as there's a couple of departments who'd like to observe at other schools. So we're working on kind of facilitating kind of a myriad of different pieces that would address that. And then the other one was being more professional development on working with students around issues of racism, homophobia, et cetera, and sort of the comfort with leading discussions on those pieces. And so we're looking into some different pieces to support that throughout the year. But we just had a discussion yesterday in our leadership meeting after sharing some information out with staff, and they brought people's perspectives, and we had a vote and decided to apply to be a No Place for Hate status school with the Anti-Defamation League. And so we're going to go through an application process with them, and what that provides then is training on awareness, identifying bias, and then how to interrupt bias and bias-based behaviors. And they do training for teachers. They do training for students, not all students. It would be particular groups of students. Like we might use our advisory reps from all our classrooms, or and maybe our Diversity Gay Straight Alliance, or particular groups. And then also they do a parent one. So it's a nice kind of well-rounded approach where everyone is kind of receiving the same information in a way that is specific to their role in the district. We also are looking towards next year of just kind of where we see some of our gaps. I think we're working with some of the high school students. Superintendent Williams was in that meeting on how to maybe train a group of high school students to work with our kids on digital citizenship and social media, since we know that hearing from a peer around that, it has a much more long-term lasting impact, the research shows that, than from an adult. And so we're looking at leveraging our wonderful high school leaders to help us with that piece of it. We have one of our school counselors and one of our PE teachers who also runs our noontime program are partnering to develop a program for how to welcome new students into our school. So whenever a new student would join our school, there would be an orientation that we'd have students give them and then would sit with them for the first couple of weeks at lunch. So we're trying to kind of formalize that. So we have a couple of pieces, I'll end there, that we're kind of looking just to round out our programs with.
So, Deborah, you were talking about, earlier you were talking about, well, actually it was Alexa who was talking about not wanting to track students, especially with math difficulties. And I did notice for the middle school that in your plan you have a supplemental math intervention class as well as the English language arts. Is this something that you've done before? And is this in addition to their regular, so they get math twice in the day then?
That's right, yeah. So we made this change, I want to say maybe it was my first year, I think 4 years ago maybe, where it used to be that kids were tracked if you were in a support class, that was your math class, and we've changed it now so every student has access to the general education math classes, general education English classes, and the support classes are supplemental to pre-teach, reteach, and fill in gaps. And then if a student is then showing competency and success in their regular math class, then they get exited out of the intervention class into an elective.
But otherwise it would take up one of their elective spaces.
That's correct.
I'm glad you bring that up because that is a very predictable controversy, right? The which is better, right? To deny them access to an elective, or to deny them access to their grade level standards and give them substandards. So what we were finding, and we find this across the state, and in my tenure as a principal, was when we only gave them the intervention class as their math class, they weren't getting their, so a sixth grader wasn't getting sixth grade standards because they needed help in fourth and fifth grade standards. Then they never got their sixth grade standards. And then they got to seventh grade, they couldn't do seventh grade class, so they were in intervention. Then in eighth, they were locked out, they were practically locked out. And the disadvantage, is that it requires, though, an additional period to give them the math intervention help.
And just add two things to that. One is just that they do have access to 2 electives, so it doesn't completely take up their electives. Right. And then the other piece of that is that our hope is, our feeling is that in middle school, if they get further and further behind in math, they become less and less engaged in school and don't see themselves as students, and it kind of sets them on a path. But if we can intervene and get them up to speed and confident, then hopefully then by the time they get to high school, they're up to the level they need to be at and able to take advantage of the full array of high school electives.
So I'm intrigued by your plan of using advisory as a vehicle for getting a lot of information to the kids. In your plan, you had a whole set of things, if I can find the page, that school climate, bullying prevention, diversity awareness, digital citizenship. When you mentioned the high schoolers coming in, I assume that it's in the advisory period that you might be slotting that also?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, the challenge with advisory is there's a lot to get in, and it's a 20-minute block. So we do use we do push in through other subjects. So for example, the high school Gay Straight Alliance comes in and talks to all of our 8th graders through English classes. So depending on what it ends up being developed with these high school students, we may ask for them to be pushed in through a subject matter class to give a longer period of time, but we haven't worked out the logistics yet.
When you talked about the different departments taking on certain skill sets that the kids needed to have, like, how do I find what work I need to make up from missed day? Was that a push into subject classes and not into advisory?
That's right, yeah. So each department took on a particular lesson. Within the first month of the school year, they had a lesson and a follow-up piece that they did within the confines of their regular subject time period.
Okay, so you're doing both, and did you use advisory this year to convey these lessons, or?
Yeah, this advisory program. I mean, it shifted and changed, but we've been pushing in sort of our social emotional school climate curriculum and advisory for a number of years now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Charlotte, did you have any questions on this section?
Pardon me if this was really covered. I was interested in whether there is a plan B for all those portions of the section that say the proposed work involves a TSA next year?
Well, I can answer that. I can start with an answer, but then you guys can chime in with what. So, Charlie, this is Peter talking. I think I can start the answer in saying that we have substantiated the funding source called State Standards Implementation Funds and set those aside to cover our goals through the 2017-18 school year, communicating that to the principals in advance so that they could articulate those goals in their school plans. But after 2017-18, that won't be substantiated because the funding runs out.
Did that answer your question, Charlie?
Yeah, I didn't catch every word. It was kind of intermittent. My understanding was we don't actually have that funding for the 2017-18 school year, or was Peter saying we do?
He's saying that we do have it for the 17-18 school year, but not guaranteed beyond that. We won't have the funding beyond the 17-18 school year.
Great. So it's basically a one-year plan.
Yes, the single plans for student achievement from the school sites are one-year plans. You'll find in the local control accountability plan is a 3-year plan. And in the first year, 2017-18, you'll notice the funding source that we use for teachers on special assignment. But in the second year, 18-19, and in the third year, 19-20, that funding is not present. And so it's dried up, it's gone. So the TSAs aren't present in those plans.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
So yeah, I just had a couple things I wanted to comment on, but the first one was this idea about you having new students who come in actually have an orientation or some other students sitting and having lunch with them. I think that's an excellent idea. Is that already happening, or is that something next steps?
It's not. We did last year. We had our Diversity Gay Straight Alliance students trying to form kind of a welcoming community, and they'd give tours, and we just found it adding it on to what they're already doing, it just wasn't sustainable. And so this counselor and one of our PE teachers got together to come up and create a club that's specifically, that's what they do. And so they'll go through a little training program, and then when kids come in, they'll be part of giving those new students tours and making connections with them, arranging meeting spots, and then having lunch with them. So it's not in place. It will be for next school year.
All right, I think that's great, and if we can kind of work together to have that happen at all the school sites, I think it's, when you go to a new school, it's a big deal, so I think that's a great idea. And also I wanted to thank both of you for just presenting excellent reports. I read over them, and I'm happy to see all the wonderful things that are happening at Marin and the Albany Middle School, and it makes me, excited to see from the other schools, and I hope to see reports that are showing all this excellent progress and all these great things going on, and thank you both very much.
I'll second that. Thank you both. It was really great to hear from you. And for Peter, having two schools and just two schools at one of these, I think has worked really well. Okay. We were really rushed last time. Yeah. And people didn't really get to say everything they needed to say.
Good. I'll keep that in mind.
I, of course, agree with both of the previous speakers, but I always try to go the next step. And there are so many great things and new programs and things that you've developed and you're trying out and that are working. I do wonder if you two have any ideas about how we can better convey to the community all of the great things that are happening at the schools, because I do think that that's a missing ingredient. Bad news travels really fast, but good news sometimes is a little bit slower, and I think that the work that you guys do should be acknowledged and should be much more well known. So.
I think one of the ideas that could really tap into your request would be student engagement with having their own stories told and capturing, for example, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but also encapsulating what they did at the end of the year could be something that we use to explore how the community can have better ideas about what we are accomplishing in school. For example, we have a Pink Squad at Marin who is really involved with fundraising. Along with that, I might add a component for them to be the communication out to the community. This is what they're doing. We have high school students who are coming to work with elementary school students when it comes to school climate. I think it would be wonderful for that high school group then to develop what the communication is out. Just one idea, using student connections, using student leadership capabilities would be one way to get the word out.
One thing I would add is that, we started a new piece with our school website based on parent feedback in terms of trying to get email communications out to everybody one time. So that was a challenge, and we found a program that does it, but without getting into the details, the platform of our website doesn't allow it to be embedded in the body of the emails. It's a technical thing, but for families, they're saying if we could get all the information in the body of email, we would read everything, because they can just open up on their phone and there it is. But we would need the sort of the tech support around doing that. So I'm, meeting with the director of technology and just trying to figure out who on our site could possibly have the bandwidth to create and maintain a new type of website. So, but that is one piece where I feel like if we could do that, then we could also have, I've been working with the Safe and Inclusive Schools Coordinator and looking at partnering, like could we get out a message at least once a month of like, these are the pieces that are happening in our school this month coming up that you can talk with your kids about. This is what they'll be learning about in advisory. But I think the technology piece has been really hard for us to pull off in a way that is accessible to families. So I think those two pieces, we're going to see where we can get with it.
I have a last comment. Okay, which is one thing that we didn't have a chance to talk about tonight, but I saw in the Marin SIPSA was some ongoing issues about before and after care, and I do hope that that's something that will continue to be worked on. I recall a mention that that the community had asked maybe to have a Spanish language enrichment available for their kids, and I think that those ideas are very interesting, and I think that deserves attention beyond just the Tupelo program and the chess, which is what I think you have now.
So I scheduled this as a review and discussion. So the standard protocol is in the past practice. This is up to you, of course, as a board member, as a board. But the standard practice in the past is to bring these back as on a consent item in the subsequent meeting. And then we'll be discussing the next two plans, which would be Cornell and Ocean View, in 2 weeks, and we would put those on consent 2 weeks later. So, okay. I know there were a couple of suggested technical revisions. We're going to work on those, and then I'll include then the final copy in the consent calendar for 2 weeks from now.
And where does that leave us with the high school?
So the high school and McGregor High are coming in September. Yeah. Thank you.